So welcome back to Zone Blitz Draft Report. I'm Eric Sandlin, back with Mark Bernier and Tony Down to hopefully wrap up the combine interview that we did. It was about a month ago now, actually. We actually wound up going on for about probably 2.5 hours, and then I discovered that Windows Movie Maker shuts you off at an hour, so we get to do it all over again. We left off. We had covered the 40-yard dash. We had covered the bench press. We've gotten into some basic biomechanics or whatever, if you will, to sort of better understand really where we're coming from when we say that drill A would be better off being done this way or being done that way. And I think we pretty much agreed, if we want to review real quickly, that when it came to the 40-yard dash, okay, fine, that makes sense as a measurement of speed and acceleration, but let's change it by having something simulating a snap count actually start it rather than letting the prospect start it. And let's have what's the name of the device again? Like a laser beam or whatever to break through. A photo gate to break the plane up to actually mark the time rather than relying on human stopwatches. And then I think we pretty much agreed that the bench press really doesn't make any sense. And that if what we're looking to do to try to measure upper body strength or anything like that would be more along the lines of, let's see how fast you can push a blocking sled a certain distance, or maybe how far you can toss a medicine ball, or I think the other one that you were talking about was like a weight up an incline. Something like that would make more sense than the bench press. So we've still got about 5 drills to cover, but I think we can lump a couple of them together because they're really designed to sort of measure similar things. And the first 2 that we can do is the vertical leap and the broad jump. Now, the vertical leap has some position-specific relevance when you talk about wide receivers, defensive backs, maybe even tight ends and linebackers and running backs. The broad jump, really what that has in common with the vertical leap, according to the book, and just as a reminder, The Draft by Pete Williams is where really sort of the inspiration for this interview came from. You're looking to try to measure lower body strength, lower body explosion. So the broad jump is just a classic, high school gym type drill. You stand at a point, you jump as far as you can. You're measured from where your heels land. And then with the vertical leap, you're standing next to a machine, what they call the Vertec. And so you stand, you reach up with an outstretched hand. They lower the bar to where your fingertips are. That's your bench mark. The flags are in half-inch increments, and you just jump as high as you can and swat at that. That flag to get your measurement. So, in regards to those drills and what we're looking for in lower body explosion or power. Thoughts?
The vertical leap, like you said, it makes sense for defensive backs, wide receivers, tight ends, people like that. But I also think it's important for defensive linemen.
Okay.
It's a good thing to measure for them because you want to see how they can jump up and swat the ball down at the line of
scrimmage.
Sure, yeah.
So in an actual game to try to defend a pass before you even get past the line of scrimmage, that kind of thing. Okay, yeah.
Well, the vertical leap, I think that's the easier of the 2. It's the one that's easiest to cheat on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's because, in my opinion, they go about setting it up incorrectly. They have the person reach up with one arm, and then they set the flags at that point, and then you jump from that point, and you're looking at the difference between the lowest flag and wherever you hit. So that's your vertical leap. But because of that, if somebody is coached to keep one arm really low, so you keep your arm low, and that's as high as I can reach, when really you can, if somebody is stretching to reach, that could be 8 inches right there.
Yeah.
The difference. So what should be done really is the person should put both hands over their head with their index fingers touching, and that should be where you put the flag.
Okay.
So you can see.
Yeah.
You can still stretch, but you can't do the spine twist and all the things that go with it.
Yeah. And funny enough, I mean, we talked the last time around about Mike Boyle, the strength and conditioning coach guy from Boston University and then the Bruins. He thought, according to the book, he thought the vertical jump was the easiest drill to beat. And basically what it came down to was During the initial reach, most players shrug their shoulders and reach as high as possible. Boyle taught his clients to do the opposite, depressing the shoulder blades, keeping the lat muscles of the upper back tight, and extending the elbows. The beauty of it is that the player creates the illusion of straining to reach as high as possible, even though he was establishing a base about 4 inches below where he would have been by elevating his shoulders. So right out of the gate, yeah, you've got like a 4-inch,
at least,
difference.
At least 4 inch, and I think 4 inches being generous.
Mm-hmm.
I think you probably can establish closer to 6 to 8 inches if you're doing it properly.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, the way that jump is done is, again, my position of this whole thing is that none of these are done in context of the sport. These are all done as individual exercises that don't necessarily reflect what will happen on the field. That's always been my problem with most of the things in the combine. So here is somebody who can swing their arms down, swing them up, jump as high as you can, very much like you would see somebody doing what's the jump in the Olympics? The high jump.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where you're extending you have a certain purpose, and that is just to get high. It is rare in a game that you're going to jump a height from a standstill. There's the occasion where the receiver stops at a position, the ball is, you're pretty much at a standstill, and you're all jumping up for it.
Right.
In the instance of the Hail Mary type pass.
Exactly. Yeah.
But to me, it's much more important. This is not only height, but timing. Because if your timing is poor, it doesn't really matter how high you get.
Right.
You're going to miss this. So I would like to see this changed to having a flag set up where somebody is going to run, plant their feet, and jump as high as they can on a dead run. So what I'd like to see is if you're running all out trying to keep up with your receiver, and you're going to then stop on a dime when the receiver stops because you're reacting, and then jump as high as you can and try to swat the ball down. How good are you at that? How's your timing? Can you stop within 12 inches of that spot that's been marked on the ground and still achieve an appreciable height?
Or maybe even instead of reacting to a spot on the ground or whatever, maybe even just a whistle blows.
Sure.
Again, you don't know when that receiver, you don't know if the receiver is running a go route or a comeback route. And if he's running a comeback route, you don't know when he's going to stop and turn back around and face the quarterback. So run, blow the whistle, boom. And obviously blow the whistle at random intervals, so that I can't be the third prospect running the drill and see, all right, the whistle got blown for Mark here and for Tony here, so I know roughly now when the whistle is going to be blown and cheat.
And if people say, well, it's, still unfair, then you just say everybody's going to have the whistle blown between the 30 and the 50. When you have them run there's a 20-yard, because most of the time I would expect you can predict what kind of route it's going to be run.
Yeah.
So you probably have an idea of how far you're going to go before you're going to have to make that defensive maneuver. So you can say to everybody, somewhere between the 30 and the 50, we're going to be blowing the whistle.
Yeah.
And that's when I need you to stop and jump as high as you possibly can. You don't need the flags anymore. Once again, we have the technology to set a camera up and film you going through your paces, and then very simply on the film, they can interpose some kind of scale to get a sense of where you are.
Because to me, when I read the description of how that's being done, I can see the rationale of the benchmark being set for each individual prospect, because the vertical leap is a measure of the difference between you flat-footed and where you actually hit the flag. But at the same time, during the course of the game or whatever, everybody's benchmark is the same. It's the ground.
Right.
You're all jumping off the same field. The field is flat.
The 5'10" guy is not going to be able to jump as high as the 6'5" guy.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
But if somehow the 5'10" guy could get to a ball as high in the air as the 6'4" guy, if the 5'10" guy has got a 40-inch vertical,
right,
and the other guy's only got a 34-inch vertical or what have you. So Brent Grimes, now in Miami, but he used to be with Atlanta. The guy's 5'9", 5'10", but he was able to be pretty good at defending taller receivers because he just could leap. He could sky.
I've always been impressed with, a lot of the corners are 5'10", 5'11", and they're covering receivers who are much taller.
Yeah, certainly right now in the evolution of the game, it's the wide receivers who are the ones coming out of college at 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". I think Calvin Johnson in Detroit is 6'6".
Yeah.
The corners are starting to get bigger. You look at Seattle's defensive backfielder, Richard Sherman,
yeah,
all those guys are
he's
6'1", 6'2". There's a couple of nice big corners in this upcoming draft. Xavier Rhodes out of Florida State, who's 6'2" or something like that. So the evolution of the game eventually, like most things, it's a constant back and forth between offense and defense. So
there's some reason. I think there's a reason for that as well. In that catching a ball on the run is much more difficult than swatting a ball down.
Sure.
So if you have a taller guy, you're not as worried about a vertical leap, because you want to be in a stable position to put your arms up and try to gain control of the ball. The other guy really, unless you're an interception machine, is really just trying to disrupt that flight. It doesn't matter where you are in the air or how unstable you are.
Right.
Because if you knock the ball down, you don't need to make a tackle. Right? So I think what you're looking at is a completely different mindset. Yes, they're both running. They're both ball involved. One of them wants to gain control of it. The other wants to disrupt that.
Yeah.
It's much easier to disrupt it than to gain control of it.
Obviously, ideally, you'd like to come away with the interception, create that turnover, put the ball back in your offense's hands. But deflecting the ball is still a win, in that individual matchup. So
I would expect that defensive backs are not taught necessarily to intercept it. They're taught to defend. Taught to make sure the guy doesn't catch the ball. If they can intercept it, you'd rather have the interception, but you'd also rather knock the ball down than miss that and have an interception where you're no longer in a position to make a tackle.
They're taught really they're taught, to disrupt the play however they can, whether that's intercepting the ball if they have the opportunity, swatting it out of the air if they can't quite do that, or even, hitting the receiver as hard as they possibly can right as the ball touches his hands. That's another thing they really practice doing, is that timing. Just hit him right in that split second as he's trying to make the catch, so that he loses concentration, takes his eye off the ball. And if they can keep doing that, the receiver will start flinching too.
Yeah. Now, as far as the broad jump goes, I think that's a harder one to. I have a hard time connecting that to almost any sport.
But again,
it's a sport in and of itself.
So, but in regards to, let's take away the sport specificness of it. Let's take away the position specificness, if that's a word. It is now. Away from it, and just go for. We just want to see what type of power or explosion that a guy can generate from his lower body. So broad jump, vertical leap.
I think you can get some of that out of the vertical leap. I don't think it's necessarily the best way to do it. The broad jump, I have always thought is silly. Okay. I hate that you have to stick the landing for the broad jump. I think it's ridiculous.
Right. I think you mentioned that when we tried to do this the first time around. Yeah.
If you're trying to measure explosiveness, if you're trying to measure control, then sure, you should have to stick the landing.
Yeah.
But if you're just trying to get explosiveness and power,
right.
If you're trying to measure that,
really count.
Who cares if you stick the landing?
Yeah.
I mean, when we talked about this previously, not even as part of the interview, we looked at actually what scientifically power is defined as, right? Power is different than strength in that time is of the essence. So if I can bench 300 pounds, I'd be impressed. But if I can bench 300 pounds, and I can push that 300 pounds up in, let's say, 5 seconds, which would be slow, and you can bench 300 pounds in 3 seconds, and Tony can bench 300 pounds in 1 second. We can all move 300 pounds, even if that's our max weight. But he's much more powerful.
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to. Is power is not only how much you can move, but how quickly you can move it.
Okay.
So work over time. In order to get a sense of that, what they're trying to do is really look at the results of power. So they are looking at how far you fly in the air before you land, and then making the assumption that the farther you fly, the more powerful you are, and to some extent that is the key.
Yeah.
And because a larger person has to generate more power, and it's going to be more difficult for a person carrying extra weight to fly quite as far before they stick the landing.
But the theory being, if their legs are stronger, you should be able to move that weight the same distance.
Yeah, to some extent that is true. What I would rather see is using technology. Power would give us a great look at acceleration, or I should say acceleration would be a great look at power.
Mhm.
Have the player start in a position that would be natural for that player, whether that is upright, 1 foot forward in a 3-point stance, whatever
Yeah.
that person is normally going to be doing, even if it's from a cut. If you have a receiver, you have a running back who's going to run and take the ball, cut and move. You can have them do it off the cut, videotape them, and see how quickly can they accelerate in the first 5 yards, 10 yards, 20 yards. And as you watch them run, you're telling them, we don't want you to run as fast as you can. We want you to keep speeding up, right? And run as hard as you can. We want you to get faster and faster and faster, which we know is impossible.
Yeah.
But then you can use your computer and look at, they got from point A to point B in this amount of time. That acceleration is really what you're now looking at as power. Their body weight is their weight, just as it is in the broad jump. And power is, of course, that the distance over work over time, and then work is distance over time.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a whole series of physics calculations here. But in the long run, the person who can get from point A to point B, whether that's 5 yards or 10 yards, in the shortest amount of time, is the most powerful. And that is a much more accurate measure of the person's personal power. Because you have to accelerate your body. Now,
some of that is being done, though, correct me if I'm wrong, some of that is being done with the 40-yard dash. Because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because when somebody runs the 40, not only are they being clocked when they hit the 40-yard mark, but they're being clocked at 10 yards and at 20 yards. And people are looking for that. What's his 10-yard split? What's his 20-yard split? Again, as a measure of acceleration
and endurance. That's the thing with the 40-yard. Now, 40-yard shouldn't be it's not a great endurance exercise. When we talk about endurance, most people think cardio. Now we're talking about muscular endurance. And that, I think, is one of the things they're trying to get at with the bench press, which we've already kind of poo-pooed as being silly, but how many times measure. Can you bench 25 pounds?
225.
225, sorry.
I could bench
I could do that.
Come on. Not as many as you think. Because muscles just give out.
Sure.
There's only so much oxygen that you can supply to them, and you'll get a burn pretty quickly if you do it well. That being said, bench press is just not a movement that you do very often in football.
Right. It's just that one time, like we talk about when you do have that hand punch when you're trying to block.
So when you're doing a 40-yard, the intent is to finish the full 40 yards as quickly as possible. Now, let's look at it in a different light. You two are coaches. And I show you two players who both complete the 40 in the same amount of time. The first guy gets to his max acceleration in the first 10 yards. The second guy gets to his max acceleration in the first 20 yards. His final speed is faster than the first guy. But it takes him much longer, twice as long, to actually get up to speed.
Right.
When they're done, they both cross the line at the same time. Who's a better athlete for you? Do you want the guy who can get to full acceleration but not run as fast overall, or do you want the guy who can run faster but takes longer to get there?
It probably depends on the position.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the 40-yard doesn't divide that out.
Right.
So if you need somebody who will blow somebody off the line, as when they talked about drag racing in the old days, the Beach Boy days, they had the cars that can take any car off the line, but are not the fastest vehicles in the 1 mile.
Right.
Right. So you've got drag racers, which are really fast in short distances, but are going to blow themselves up if you go. That's me. Right. Yeah, dwarves are natural sprinters. Yeah. Right. Or you have those cars that, when they get to speed, are really, really fast, but they have to get up to that speed. I think different positions require different things. One is more explosiveness. One is more of a long-term. Once I get my wheels going, it's hard to stop me, but it also takes a little time to get up to that speed. The 40-yard, what you were trying to say is, does the 40-yard dash give us that same level of understanding of power? I don't think that it does.
Okay. All right. So what then, if the goal was to see, what sort of lower body explosion somebody can generate, rather than, the vertical leap might still be valid just for the sake of, to some degree, just for the sake of wide receivers, defensive backs, and so forth. Right? But as far as just lower body explosion, rather than the broad jump, rather than the vertical leap, we might look at more of something like you were just talking about, some sort of way to measure acceleration.
And that would be, to me, much more sport specific. I mean, there are probably other ways you can do it, some kind of squat machine with a force meter in it.
Maybe again for linemen and blockers, defensive linemen, we want to see them hit a blocking sled and see, how quickly they can move it at X distance or something like that.
That would be a terrific way to do it. You take the average weight of the X, whatever player is going to be lined up opposite you, depending on position, and then have them move that sled a certain distance in a certain amount of time is what, that's going to be your baseline. Anybody who's faster than that is more powerful, and anybody who's slower than that is less powerful.
Now, what about, so we kind of talked about these ideas too with as a potential replacement for the 225 bench press, with some idea that this would also be a measure of upper body strength. So what about, and now I'm just completely pulling stuff out of my head and throwing ideas out there, but as a 225 replacement, what about that? Last time around we kind of joked about that plate that Ivan Drago punches into. So you've got a plate in front of you, and the whistle blows to simulate the snap count or whatever, and you hit that plate, not just because you've launched off with your lower body and whatnot, but because you're doing that punch, that shove. Whereas to get lower body explosion, maybe it's the same idea, but only you're not going to use you're just going to put your shoulder into the plate or something. And so your arms aren't a part of the equation. It's just really, I would assume, your lower body, maybe your core.
Well, I guess part of the question is, when will you do that in the game?
Well, I mean, if you're a defender and you're coming in to tackle somebody, I mean, especially in today's NFL where the vast majority of them don't tackle, they just go for ESPN highlight hit. Then you're just gonna. But I mean, they're making the rules now where you can't use your head as part of the tackle. You're supposed to come in with your shoulder and then wrap
the shoulder back.
So but how often do you do that from a standstill?
From a standstill, almost
never.
And that's what we're talking about.
So you're always building up
you're
momentum.
talking about.
So give them a 10-foot running start.
Yeah, something like that. Okay.
So what I think when you're talking again about linemen, that idea of the explosiveness and basically putting your hands into the tackling dummy. A lot of this is technique.
Sure.
Power is technique. So rather than just look at a base number, I don't care how strong your legs are. I don't care how strong your arms are. I care how do you use that in concert. And we talked about, the Johnny Damon idea where.
Had to hit you again, Johnny. Sorry.
I don't think it ever made our last.
No, it did. It did. It made the last one. Yeah.
And talking about the idea of a really strong person may not be able to throw a ball very far
because of technique.
The coordination of the muscles, they're not all being used at once. So if you have somebody who is 75% as powerful as another guy, it's in individual muscle groups, but can put all of those muscle groups together and have them all hit that tackling dummy at the same time. Rather than one person who is doing it where their timing is off, the smaller, less powerful looking guy is actually going to hit a lot harder. And I expect there are plenty of football players out there who get hit by somebody they haven't been hit by before, like that guy hits like a truck. And they don't.
Told many, many times that I hit harder than I look like I have any right to.
Right. And so a lot of that ends up being timing. There are little guys who can hit home runs, and big guys who can't. And really, it doesn't come down to pure muscle strength. Most likely, the big guy benches more than the little guy. You might have really big baseball players who are much larger than Pedroia.
I was just going to say, like Dustin Pedroia. I mean, he's for his size because he's about our size, really. I mean, he's
8.
But because of his, I'm assuming probably bat speed and his technique as a hitter, he actually generates decent power for his size.
Right, and that's what I would say. For his size.
Yeah.
Well, for his size, for anybody's size, if you're hitting 30 home runs in a season, you're doing pretty good. In this day of decreased steroid abuse.
Right.
So in fact, 30 to 40 now is the goal again, not 50 to 70, as it was in the steroid era of baseball. So, so we don't keep going on. I think there are just better ways of looking at functional power rather than individual muscle group power.
And I think at the end of the day, that probably goes back to, again, something that I brought up last time around, where there's that whole process that goes on, and part of the process is watching the game film and watching the practice tape and so forth. And you can certainly see in a game film or in a practice tape, whether or not somebody has good technique, whether or not somebody has functional football strength as opposed to weight room strength, whether or not somebody understands leverage or not. The next set of drills then that we'll talk about would be the 3-cone drill and the short shuttle. And what these two drills are intended to be is basically agility, balance, change of direction, lateral ability. So the short shuttle is fairly simple. You know, you're at a standstill, you go 5 yards to your right, touch a line, go 10 yards to your left, touch a line, come back to the middle, touch a line, done. Essentially, I'm pretty sure that's essentially how it works. And then the 3-cone drill is running around an L shape, 5 yards apart from one another. You begin in a 3-point stance next to cone A, run to B, bend down, touch the ground, run back to A, bend down, touch the ground, run back to B around the outside of it, inside cone C, cut around the outside of the 2 cones before sprinting back to A. And did I miss anything in regards to the short shuttle? You're starting in a 3-point stance with the short shuttle. 5 yards, then 10, touching. Yeah, okay. So again, just measurements of balance, change of direction, agility.
I think the 3-cone drill, is possibly the most useful and the most underrated of all the drills in the combine. If there's a base concept that the game of football boils down to, I would say there's two that I would say is timing, which you can't really measure in this way,
right?
And being able to change direction rapidly.
Sure.
It is huge for every position, every single position in the game. You need to be able to change direction quickly, turn on a dime. You know, it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this, would you think that okay, I'm sorry, you just said basically the 3-cone, more so than the short shuttle, to you is a more valid exercise.
The 2 shuttle runs, my feelings on those are kind of that I think they're valid, but I think we look at them for the wrong things. We look at them for change of direction and conditioning, as you said. I think really what they're more useful for is getting a sense of a player's lateral movement, their ability to traverse the field while keeping their eyes on the quarterback. Important for offensive linemen and blockers, for pass blocking. They do a lot of that lateral movement.
Sure.
Huge for defensive backs in zone coverage, linebackers in zone coverage, safeties in particular. I think
especially now with the cover 2 and having to handle half of the field.
Right, or even a cover 1 if you have an Ed Reed type. He's got to cover the whole width of the field and keep his eyes on the quarterback the whole time. He's got to be able to move laterally quickly.
I would agree that those are probably the 2 most useful drills. And I think that a lot can be gained from what you're seeing there. But because they're always done the same way, they can be practiced as all the things in the combine can be practiced. And that, maybe it tells you something in the fact that those people who excel at them may be just willing to put in the time.
Right.
And I think that's an important aspect of it. I wonder often how much coaches glean from the way players approach the combine rather than what they do in the combine. How serious are they at trying to better their times? What are they doing to practice for the combine? How much time are they putting into it? To me, that may be more important. Especially in a Belichickian world, where whatever you did in college, I'm probably going to change.
Yeah, right.
So I need you to be able to adapt.
Yeah, and going back to the 225 bench press for a moment, something that was mentioned in the book here about the 225 was the general consensus, I guess, or assumption by many coaches that if somebody put up a poor showing at the bench press, it somehow indicated a lack of dedication towards working out in the weight room or conditioning.
It certainly is a popular thing amongst weightlifters is bench. It is probably
how much you bench.
How much you bench is one of the most important numbers. It doesn't mean anything, but it's one of the most important numbers people like to brag about. I guess I would question a coach who believes that. Said, would you rather somebody be in the weight room 3 hours a day, or on the track,
or have their head in the playbook?
Yeah, well, especially today's NFL. If we're talking about fitness, though, would you rather have somebody running sprints and keeping up with their leg power and speed and cardiovascular strength, or do you want somebody, hanging out in the weight room, benching and curling, and doing whatever. I'd much rather have somebody out on the field, doing the plyometric stuff, the explosiveness stuff, rather than the bench press.
Right.
When it comes down to what we're talking about here with the shuttle run and the short shuttle, I think, again, what I would like to see is the one thing that never really gets measured anywhere in the combine is somebody's mental agility when it comes to reflexes. So I'd like to see somebody run at the cone and then have a light on either side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they hit a certain point, either the left light or the right light lights up. And that's the side you have to go to do your turn.
It doesn't get done for everybody, to the best of my knowledge. But I know, at least for defensive backs, there's a
positional drill.
Yeah, it's a position-specific drill. And I know it goes back to, I think this is stuff they do go all the way back to high school, junior high school. They probably even do it in Pop Warner for that matter. But I'm the coach, you're facing me, I have a football, and I do this, and you're supposed to backpedal. And then I'll do this, and you break to that side. I'll do this, and you come towards me. I'll do this, and you break to that side. Mm-hmm. So, so yeah, there's that drill that kind of gives you that same idea, that mental acuity. At least for defensive backs, they have that.
I think they should do it for running backs.
Yeah, I was going to say it'd be nice to see.
Sure, react to all right, you've got a tackler coming at you. Yeah. What do you do? You need to break this way, or just react to a hole.
Sure. We talked about that idea of having a virtual field. The virtual screen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They do it in golf. They do it in baseball.
Yeah.
I think you could do something like that where you can test somebody's ability to hit that hole. I suppose you can get a good sense of somebody's ability by watching loads of film, watch what they've done their entire lives. But if you want to see somebody, do it right in front of you, that's really the only way to do it, without putting them in a game-style situation.
Right. Just going back to something that you had said a second ago, too, in regards to the shuttle. Once again, going back to Boyle and how he started really this whole industry of prepping prospects for the combine. Mm-hmm. He talks about the shuttle, he looked at the 20-yard shuttle drill and marveled at how players lost time with poor technique. Not because they necessarily lacked lateral quickness and change of direction capabilities. He taught, players to basically complete the drill in 12 steps. A lot of players took extra steps to make sure they touched the line with the right hand. And so he would just teach them, you're going to do it in 12 steps. You're going to take X number of steps this way, touch, X number of steps this way, touch. And when you finish the drill, you will have only taken 12 steps and therefore not lose time because of poor technique. So for the final physical drill then, we're talking about the long shuttle, which obviously is pretty much the same thing as the short shuttle, just over a longer distance. I believe in basketball it's essentially used as like a gasser drill. Mm-hmm. And the point, according to Williams' book, the point behind the drill really is just let's measure conditioning, let's measure endurance.
I think that's. It's like I think I spoke about the long shuttle a little bit already. I don't see it as a test of conditioning as much. I really see it as this lateral movement over a longer distance. So very important for zone coverage.
Right.
Doesn't really apply too much anywhere else.
Okay.
That's kind of my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to some extent, I'm sure it does what they're looking for. I guess I'd have to see what they're using as a measure at the end.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to know how well conditioned somebody was, I would be looking at heart rate.
Okay.
That's really your best indication. And one of the things that most people, without going too far afield here, that most people mistake is that heart rate in and of itself is not meaningful. Okay.
But how quickly you recover from it?
Well, no, even heart rate in and of itself. When people
need the resting at the baseline.
We need a resting heart rate, and resting heart rate is also misunderstood. Resting heart rate is actually waking up in the morning and laying in bed unmoving for 2 minutes and then getting a heart rate. That is a true resting heart rate.
Okay.
When you first wake up in the morning and you haven't gotten up yet and started moving around. So when we're talking about a seated resting quote unquote heart rate, that's what most people are dealing with, because it's rare that you get up out of bed and then jump on the field and play.
Right.
So, we're talking about more of a functional rest. But no. Heart rate in and of itself, what does it tell you? How many times your heart beats a minute? theoretically, who cares? Because why is your heart beating? What is it doing? Well, it's actually carrying oxygen and nutrients.
Right.
And the reason your heart rate increases or decreases during an exercise is due to your oxygen requirements. So somebody who requires a lot of oxygen in a short period of time, their heart rate goes up. So when you're looking at conditioning, heart rate is an indicator, but the heart rate itself is not meaningful. Okay. So when a person lifts weights, for example, their heart gets thicker inward. Okay. The heart walls get really thick, but the size of the ventricles, the chambers inside the heart, get smaller. So the heart pumps less blood per beat. And therefore, to get the same amount of blood as another person, it has to beat more often.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So people who lift weights exclusively, especially if they hold their breath during a heavy exertion, actually build more muscular hearts. And that's good on the surface, I guess. Muscular heart's nice.
Right.
But
the heart is a muscle, isn't it?
Correct. It is
Okay.
muscle. It's not the same as skeletal muscle, but it is muscular. And it reacts to pressure. So when you hold your breath, your blood pressure goes up. Your heart has to pump against a greater pressure, which means it needs more force. More force requires more mass, so the heart gets thicker. Just like adding weight to your curl. So it makes it harder to do it, so your bicep has to do more work, and your bicep grows. You should be, if exercising properly, not ever holding the breath, which prevents as much of a spike in blood pressure during the exertion.
And yet it's everybody's instinctive reaction to do exactly that.
Yeah, I didn't know I said it. So it takes training, and all of these guys, I would hope, anybody in the combine knows enough about lifting in the weight room to not do that.
Right.
That being said, in the long run, what we're looking at is how much oxygen is taken. A runner, when they run, do something called Starling effect, or Starling's law. As the blood pushes into the heart, it stretches the heart wall. And then when the heart wall gets stretched, when a muscle is stretched, its reaction is to contract, which is actually what causes a lot of muscle pulls in football. Somebody throws an arm out there to block somebody, they get hit. As they're pulled back, the muscle contracts to protect itself, and then you tear your muscle. Let's say you tear the upper pelvic. Okay. And that's why they tell people not to bounce when they're stretching. When you bounce down, the muscle's reaction to protect itself is to pull back. So you're pushing the muscle in one direction, it's pulling in the other direction, and then you pull it when you tear it.
Okay.
So to get back to the point, the runner is stretching their heart when they run. So now they pump more blood per beat. So they need fewer beats. Right? Fewer beats per minute to pump the same volume of blood. So when we're talking about heart rate, the rate itself is not what's important. It's the amount of blood being pumped per beat. And that is only important with respect to the fitness of the person. So you're looking at two things. How much oxygen is required to complete the exercise? Okay? And that is based on how efficient do you do the movement. So a great runner is not necessarily going to have terrific heart rates when swimming, because they're using a whole different set of muscle groups that aren't trained efficiently in those movements. A terrific swimmer may have a great resting heart rate, but their heart rate will elevate more if they go cycling than if they go swimming. So you have your triathletes. That's one of the reasons everybody's impressed with triathletes.
Sure.
Because they're using many muscles in many different types of recruitment patterns, and they generally are really in great shape when it comes to that. Their resting heart rates can be in the 50s, sometimes in the low 50s, where the average for an adult should be about 70. Your football player athletes probably are somewhere in the mid to high 60s, I would think. So what I would like to see is somebody do a run that elevates their heart rate, and then what you want to do is how high did they get in that short period of time, and then how quickly did they get back to baseline. And that is how in a hospital or in a stress test they're going to look to see how fit you are. Is we're going to do this intense exercise for, let's say, 5 minutes. Your heart rate's going to get to a max, what we call VO2 max. So let's say that's 180 beats per minute. And then it takes me 2 minutes to get back to normal. It takes you 4 minutes to get back to normal. It takes him 5 minutes to get back to normal. I'm in better shape.
Okay.
Technically.
What about one of the other things that's done at the combine, along with measuring height and weight and wingspan and all this other stuff, is body fat percentage. So, and typically, as you might expect, the offensive lineman and the defensive lineman usually have, the 20%, 25% body fat, whereas Well, no, there are some of them who do.
Oh, I'm sure
There was a guy this year who I think measured out at about 26.2% body fat. And he, needless to say, weighs close to 400 pounds. But at the same time, I've also seen scouting reports on guys where they're worried because he's only carrying 4% body fat, and therefore the scout seems to think that this means this guy's going to be more susceptible to injury. He doesn't have the padding, basically. They seem to think that ideally you want to carry like 9 to 10%. You're still in shape, you still look cut, but you've got some armor against getting hit.
Body fat minimum for males is about 3%. That's minimum healthy. So bodybuilders even drop below that. But percent body fat is a misleading number. And it is misleading in football as well, usually, with the exception possibly maybe of kickers and quarterbacks. The amount of muscle mass overall is greater than the average. Now, there are probably some kickers and quarterbacks who are fairly dense and muscular, but for the most part, I think you're looking at the other positions tend to be more muscular. Because body fat is a percent, if I took two identical twins, we'll use easy numbers, that will both weigh 100 pounds, and they're both at 10% body fat, and I add 20 pounds of muscle to one of them, and don't change the fat, their percent fat drops.
Right.
So they still have enough fat for their organs to be healthy, for all the other things to be healthy, but in comparison to their overall lean body tissue, their percentage is now whatever, 8%. Okay. Not doing the math. So it can be a little bit misleading, particularly in BMI is even worse.
Okay.
For example, the last time I saw Terrell Owens' BMI, he was obese. By BMI standards.
And of all the faults Terrell Owens may have,
that's not one.
Obesity is not one of them.
Hopefully he never sees this.
Well, even my
obesity
BMI,
is not one of them. Yeah.
I'm obese, according to BMI. Now, I talk to a doctor and they do a lean muscle tissue test rather than a straight BMI. My personal doctor says, hey, you're fine. Your lean muscle is fine. That's what's throwing your weight off. And therefore you look heavier than you should for your height. And almost all football players on their BMIs end up being off the charts in the wrong way.
That's because BMI is a horrible.
It's an insurance
way to measure.
Yeah. And percent body fat isn't a lot better. So I guess your question once again, padding? Sure. I mean, 15% is average for guys. 17% is getting a little bit high. Anything over 20% is bad. Over 25%, I believe, is obese. Anything below 6 or 7% is now you're talking about your distance runners. Anything below 3% is generally getting to unhealthy. Now a bodybuilder drops below 3%, but when you add whatever, let's say 60 pounds of lean tissue, the average person is at 5 to 6%. That drops them below 3. See what I mean? And they're still okay. My question is, what could you do as an athlete if you dropped 30 pounds of fat? Because most of what we're talking about here, when we're talking about explosive movements, you have to move your own bulk.
Right.
Now, granted, you grow up with that bulk. So if you're squatting, when you do a squat and you weigh 300 pounds, theoretically, and it doesn't really work this way, but theoretically, if you drop 50 pounds, you should be able to add 50 pounds to your squat. Because there's 50 pounds less of you to move. And so you should be able to throw more on the bar. That 50 pounds, of course, is distributed across the body, and the lower it gets, the less. So it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. I would think that most of your guys, your skill position players, would like to have lower body fat. It should allow them to change direction more quickly. It should allow them to accelerate faster, which is really important, especially in the lateral movement we're talking about. Not only is cutting important, but then accelerating from that position is even more important. Making that cut on a dime and then bursting out of that. That's how you leave a guy in the dust.
So, real quick, if I may, just because I'm not sure how much time we've got left here, but quick question, just because you were talking about the whole heart thing. So, one of the top prospects in the draft, when he was at the combine, they found some sort of what they thought may have been a medical condition. And basically, they found that his left ventricle was only operating at 44% efficiency, whereas the norm is somewhere between, I think they said 55 and 70. So, and they weren't sure. He's been medically cleared since, but at the time they weren't sure what to make of that. Like, is there some sort of issue with his heart? Is this a medical problem that's going to rear its ugly head at some point during his career? Or is it because he was trying to lose weight? I mean, this is a defensive tackle who's a natural 315 to 320 pounder, so he was trying to lose some weight and not be viewed as being fat or obese. Was that drop in efficiency just a reaction to his regimen? Would that ring any kind of alarm to you? Or
I mean, I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to tell him to rub some dirt in it. But
If you can do that to your heart, there are other problems.
Yeah, you've got other problems.
What they're calling operational efficiency, I'm assuming has to do with stroke volume, how much blood is pumping per squeeze.
Yeah.
Because
All the report said was 44%. It should be 55 to 70.
So my guess is that what they're trying to estimate is the amount of blood the left ventricle can pump per beat in volume. Then how much it does pump per beat at normal activity levels.
Okay.
And so if it could pump 100 milliliters per beat at max activity, and then at rest it pumps, let's say 60 mils, and his is only pumping 44 mils. What does that signal? It signals yes, it should throw up a red flag in my opinion. Because what happens is the heart rate will increase higher than somebody who can pump more blood per beat. The faster the heart has to pump, the more oxygen it requires because it's doing more contractions. That puts an excess strain on the heart. So the heart is now building its own waste materials while it is trying to pump it at higher rates. That's why you always want your athletes to have the lowest possible exercising heart rate. The heart is less stressed during those periods. The maximum human heart rate should be about 220, 225. For these guys, we should be seeing probably maximum heart rate somewhere in the 180 range, maybe 185, 190.
Okay.
At our age, we're looking at about 170, 165.
Yeah.
And if our heart rates ever get above that level on a consistent basis, you're looking at having heart problems.
Okay.
So if he's pumping at 44% efficiency, you're talking somebody who might be increasing their exercise heart rate by more than 10 beats a minute. Then that could be significant. In football, maybe not so much.
Okay.
What's his position?
He's a defensive tackle.
So how often will he be running all out for any extended period of time?
Hardly ever.
So then probably not a big deal.
All right.
Defensive tackles get rotated a lot. Too.
Yeah, there's that too. So
That was the other thing we talked before about why I think heart rate and recovery rate, which is the technical term, is so important, is that if guys get to rest in between plays and their recovery rates are phenomenal, they're going to be fresh when they get back to the line.
Right.
So if you can recover in the time it takes to huddle, and I think that's why we're seeing such a movement toward the no huddle.
Sure.
You're really stressing these guys.
Yep.
You can't get to rest in between plays.
Yep. Especially the chubby guys out there, they're huffing and puffing up to the line. You know?
So the final thing that we'll talk about then, we'll actually get away from the physical. You were talking about dense a second ago, so let's get to the mental. The Wonderlic test, a basic IQ test, as far as I can tell, along the lines of your classic IQ test. You've got 50 questions. You've got 12 minutes to answer them. The score is based, obviously, not on how many you answer in 12 minutes, but how many you answer correctly. The idea is that it's supposed to be a measurement of not only intelligence, but cognitive ability and how well you think under pressure.
12 minutes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, again, I played football in the military, and before you go into the military, they make you take their version, which is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, which they call the ASVAB.
Yep.
Now, the ASVAB, in a lot of ways, is a standard issue IQ test, similar to the standardized tests you might take in school. They're timed. It is timed, but they give you a lot of time for most of them. There are a few where they don't, and those are important. There's there's your basic math and English and things like that. Then they also have a test where they give you like 100 very simple, like single-digit math problems, and they only give you like 2 minutes because they want to measure your reaction time. They want to see how quickly you can get how many of them. They have a coding speed test. It's similar, but they give you like a matrix, and you have to match things up, and you know, again, you have about 2 minutes to do it. They want to see how quickly you can get through it. They have a mechanical aptitude test where they'll show you like 7 gears and say if this gear turns this direction, which direction does this gear turn? You know. So they have the basic IQ stuff, but they also have kind of some specialized stuff where they're going to say, okay, this kid will make a great mechanic. You know, this kid has really good reaction time. Let's make sure we get him into, you know, infantry or special operations.
Fighter pilot.
Yeah, well, not in the Army, but
yeah. What a pilot, helicopter pilot, or whatever.
Yeah. In any case, I think the NFL could benefit from a specialized IQ test. You know, IQ is not football IQ.
Right.
You know, the thing that keeps popping into my mind is the movie The Program.
Okay.
Where they have,
I've actually never seen it, but
really,
I haven't. Believe it or not.
You gotta watch that one. They have this linebacker who, as far as you know, his classes go, is an absolute rockhead.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason he's passing is because I think he's paying somebody to take his tests for him and something like that. And then, you know, they kind of do it subtly. They don't really come right out and say, but they show him in the film room and they're asking him questions about his assignments and certain defenses, and he's just rattling them off. I mean, he's just on top of it. Exactly. And I think that's something you got to look at. I think that, you know, there are guys who are brilliant at football knowledge, and they're absolute morons everywhere else. You know, some of these guys, you see them make these great plays, and then you listen to them at the press conference after the game. You're like, if you were any dumber, I'd have to water you. Like, and I don't want to name any names.
I was just going to say,
I don't want anyone to come to my house
film
and kick my ass. But you know,
yeah. Intelligence tests have always suffered from a number of problems. I think one of the biggest problems. I haven't seen The Wanderlife, and I don't know if it's ever been criticized as being, and I hate to bring this up, I'm going to anyway, being racist, in that many of the SATs, ACTs, have been written by people, and the questions reflect a certain type of background. So there were, in the old days, you'd have questions like, you know, how often did you have to do such and such to the back 40? Okay, and so you give this to somebody from an urban environment, regardless of their race.
Sure.
And they have no idea what the back 40 is.
Yeah.
And so they don't answer those questions well. Yep. So I think it would be interesting to see what kinds of questions are put in there and whether it's been taken into account that they're being given to farmers, you know, from Nebraska, and they're given to, you know, kids who are coming out of Brooklyn, you know, and now kids from, you know, possibly even different countries.
Sure.
Yeah. So
there's what you've got a German kid in this draft. You've got a Estonian in this draft. You've got Ziggy Ansah is
Mediterranean somewhere, isn't he?
He's African, I think, but I'm trying to think of what African country.
Either way.
But yeah,
point taken.
I mean, obviously it doesn't take into account, and these are criticisms that get leveled at the SATs and so forth as well. It doesn't take into account language differences. Right. It doesn't get taken into account, and we can get deeper into this, hopefully, if we have the time off. We can get into the things where it doesn't take into account how different people test, and going back to the whole Howard Gardner, did I get the name right?
Although I kind of call bullshit on the language barrier question, because if you can't speak or read English well enough to take the test, I probably don't want to hire you.
I don't know. Right. Could you train somebody who doesn't read well to teach them the place? Could you assign somebody?
Yeah.
So then,
because it's just X's
in
and O's.
In that
case,
I'm just saying in defense of the tests in general.
Okay.
Like
I'm talking.
But
if there's a major language barrier, that's something I'm going to want to know.
The Wonderlic actually does. It has a website. You can go out there and actually take the test if you want to. So just as an example, when rope is selling for 10 cents a foot, how many feet can you buy for 60 cents? That's one of the questions. Assume the first two statements are true. The boy plays baseball. All baseball players wear hats. Is the final statement true, or false, or uncertain? The boy wears a hat.
Sure.
You know, I mean, these are the types of questions that are getting chucked out. The paper sells for 21 cents a pad. What will 4 pads cost? Resent, reserve. Do these words have similar meanings, have contradictory meanings, mean neither the same nor opposite? These are the types of questions that are all in the
Because
wonder.
knowing the difference between resent and reserve has a lot to do with football.
Oh, totally. But that's what I'm saying, where I think the NFL could benefit from a more football-specific intelligence test.
Right. And, the history of the wonder, like all of these tests, really. Let's talk about the 40-yard dash. Jerry Rice, greatest wide receiver in the history of the game. I think most people would agree with that statement. Here's a kid who ran, a 4. He's not a kid anymore, but when he was drafted. Here's a kid who ran a 4.640, which is a plodding slow time for a wide receiver.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember seeing too many people catch Jerry Rice from behind.
That honestly, to what I've been saying all along, is that the testing that they're doing is not game specific. And Jerry Rice knew how to turn it on, or was much more motivated in game situations than he was in the combine.
And it also obviously played into when you are playing a football game, you're not running around in sneakers and a pair of tights.
Right.
You've got pads on and helmets on. And
brings me back to my original argument that almost everything you do in the combine should be done in pads.
Yeah.
Almost.
There's a difference between game speed and practice speed, basically, or track speed. But in regards to the wonder, the example that's brought up in this book is Dan Marino. Marino scored a 16 on the wonder. I don't think anybody's going to question his ability to read a defense, to go through his progressions. Granted, back in the 80s when he was in his heyday, he was drafted in 84, 83. He was drafted in 83. I'm sorry. Defenses weren't as complex back then as they are now. Offenses weren't as complex as they were back then now. But you still had to be able to read a defense, and nobody's going to question Marino's, greatness as a quarterback.
You would try to bring up.
I never heard anybody rave about his intelligence either. I mean, when you
watch him on
ask
television,
about,
he's a horrible analyst.
He's an articulate guy, but whenever anybody talks about him as a quarterback, they never talk about his intelligence like they do with the Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. They talk about him having an absolute for an
there is
that arm strength, that quick release. Yeah. Those were the two biggest things.
His mobility in the pocket,
or lack thereof.
Yeah. He knew where he needed to move, though.
Sure.
That was the thing.
Not me.
No, that's my phone.
So anyway, while we grew to the
it's a little Stevie Wonder beat there,
yeah. You mentioned Howard Gardner before, and Howard Gardner is famous for something that he never meant. Right?
Okay.
Howard Gardner came up with back then the 7 intelligence, which has been expanded to 9, and now I believe 10. And I guess you have to keep expanding them so you can sell more books. But his 7 intelligences were taken out of context, and in fact, in 2011, he wrote a paper about all the things that have happened since his first paper. And one of them was that education took his theories and ran with it, and he never really intended the education system to use them at all.